Mindset Podcast. We are your guide as you make your way through life, getting better 1% every day. We believe that life is lived and true victory won through adversity. Nothing easy is ever worth it. We believe in the warrior ethos and support those that choose to walk that path.
We wanted to talk a little bit about Carl Jung's shadow archetype, which is mainly the deal here. And we want to dabble a little bit into, last time we talked about, how do you want to say it? Like psilocybin. We talked about, medical.
We basically provided
therapy.
we basically provide the information. It wasn't advocating. I mean, maybe there are portions of it, but we since talked about the empirical side of how the stuff works, and we broke down that video, and we talked about the important pieces for people to take objective information.
But I never really hear anyone talking about like how does it actually help you, or any of this stuff, even before you get to the point where you want to use some sort of assistance, they never talk about how. They never talk. They're just like, yeah, I did this stuff and it was a trip and now I'm magically better. Cool. I get there's a bunch of stuff you probably don't want to talk about, I get it, but how? So you bring up, this is we've talked a couple times, probably the third time you brought up this concept of the shadow self.
That's right.
So what is
the shadow realm?
So set me up, set me right.
So
I have the textbook definition.
Oh, you do? Okay, but let's start with that. Read the textbook definition for everybody, please.
So, no problem. Carl Jung's shadow archetype refers to the unconscious aspects of an individual's personality that they reject or deny. The rejected parts of the psyche are often deemed negative, primitive, or socially unacceptable. They often include repressed thoughts, emotions, desires, and impulses. Yeah?
Love it. I love it.
Jung believed that the shadow is not inherently evil, but rather a natural and necessary aspect of the psyche. And it goes on into how you should confront it and own it, deal with it, become one with it.
This makes me so excited. I can't sit still, literally. That piece, it sticks out so much. I mean, I don't know if you ever heard much of Carl Jung growing up, Gene, or if anybody out there listening did. I never recalled in any of my psychology classes in high school, even early college, talking about Carl Jung. It was always Sigmund Freud.
It was always Freud.
And little do they know, or I guess it is common knowledge now, Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud worked together until Carl Jung was more wait, I want to dive more into the unconscious or subconscious, and Freud was more, hey, this is how the brain actually works. This is what the brain does. So very direct versus very mysterious, if you will. That whole.
Gotcha.
Now, the shadow archetype is part of many of his the human psyche archetypes, or the archetypes of human psychology, this, that, and the other. And we can dabble into those another time. But this one is likely argued to be the most important, because being aware of subconscious is something that Freud didn't necessarily, he wasn't super cool with it, to keep it in layman's. And they actually split. That's the shortest possible version of their history. They ended up not becoming good coworkers. They had a toxic relationship. Which is kind of interesting when you think of the study of psychology, acceptance of oneself, and this, that, and the other. You have two people who are the biggest. Well, Carl Jung is more the unknown biggest name, but is a big name now. Versus Freud, who was, everybody knew Freud. Two people preaching be well, be in well state, well-being, this, that, and the other, and they split because of differences. It's artistic differences or visionary differences or whatnot in media. But this the travel into the subconscious is one of the most difficult things to do, because it's subconscious, it's unconscious. How do we achieve that? And
Yeah.
we purposely put up like the barriers in a sense to not want to accept everything about ourselves and the
Yeah.
shadow archetype specifically. I wish I had, my computer wasn't working, otherwise I'd be able to send you a photo to overlay with this. It's a circle that has the animus with, I don't know, crap, I can't remember. Oh, that's embarrassing. Oh well. It separates into conscious and subconscious, and it paints a very clear portrait of how it can connect and how you can tap into it
Right.
without the use of anything. But the use of things help, and we'll talk about it later. Um, this shadow archetype is always with us. It's our literal shadow, like the sun puts on us, the light puts on us. And as you just read, it's the portion, just like most of anything, that we want to avoid. And can you hear the
Yeah.
weights slamming in the background, by the way?
A
Yes,
little bit.
that
It's
is it.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. I thought it might be.
I'll close the door real quick. Hold on.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the photo. If everyone gets a chance to see it, um, it's super cool. Kind of how the layout is, in my opinion. I mean, I also kind of nerd out over this stuff. So, the that collective unconscious, like that's kind of the deep layer. The self, anima animus. That's it. The self is the most difficult part to dive into, even though it's not necessarily the quote unquote deepest, right? Based off this little water level thing here.
Yeah.
It's not the deepest. The self is almost impossible to hit if you refuse to approach your shadow.
Gotcha.
Now, no one wants to achieve their shadow. Why, Gene? What's a go-to whenever people are like, hey, can you not do these things you're doing?
Yeah.
What do they tend to do?
They just shut down.
Yeah, they shut down. They fight back. Exactly. And that's a in my opinion, like a fear response, or I wouldn't say trauma response. It's definitely more like a fear response of like, I don't want to get in trouble. That's not who I am, so I'm gonna just fight back. I don't like that I was just called out for something that I failed at, so I want to.
Yeah.
I'm gonna fight you on it.
Double down on it. My son will double down on it.
No.
You know, be like, don't do these things, and he's like, cool, and then he just like goes and does them. Like, what are you doing, bro?
Yeah, it's a unique thing to be there, because that's the society accepted thing, right? That's
right.
Well, that's what everyone else does, eye for an eye type of deal or whatnot.
Yeah.
I think the simplest way that we may be able to put this is like our shadow archetype is our failures, our perceptive failures. And if we preach failing to succeed, why can't we approach our internal failures?
Right.
So, what do you think, Gene, is one of the most appropriate ways that someone can maybe develop a degree of comfort in approaching their own shadow? And what do you think they might receive by confronting, quote unquote, their shadow?
I think, it seems like a nice level of self-awareness, which I think is super important just in daily life, is to just to confront it, is to just be aware of it, And that way you're going to have some sort of self-control. You're going to have some sort of self-awareness. You're going to know when you're doing those things that you're like, hey, you're being a real jackass. Nobody wants to be a jackass.
No, and I love that you use that word awareness. It's almost like people are often afraid to be aware of just who they are, and like there's a degree of fabled discontent. Everyone loves to just be who they are.
For real, I think one of the stereotypes is like that guy who's hiking through the park with music full blast, like on his personal Not headphones, but it's like a music. And they got to have music everywhere because they can't be quiet with themselves because they don't want to confront, like, the quiet and who they are. We all
Yeah,
know this.
dude. And, oh, I love that. That's great because that's so true.
You know?
That that was really well said. I like I like that a lot. And honestly, that metaphor can also be painted in a sense like it, the joy that the music brings as a sense of quote unquote protection to the person
Yeah.
who wants to avoid their inner demons, their self talk.
Right.
That noise making machine could possibly be the joy that confronting your shadow could bring you.
Yeah, really.
And I say that quite subjectively, and I'll give you an example. Um, for let's see, how many years? For about 8 years, my wife and I have been married, and she was in the army, right? You know that. You know that.
Yeah.
I had no problem trying to decide her future for her. I had no problem saying that what she was doing was not good enough for our lives, our daughter's lives, and in her life, as opposed to not being aware of like anything that happened to her. It was like, the old adage, like there's two sides to each story. There's two sides to
Yeah.
everyone's life, maybe more than
Right.
two. Um, I only saw my side of the story because I was a conceited dick. So that part of me, for those almost 8 to 10 years of the hellacious way I was treating my spouse, throwing her under the bus, stuff we've talked about before, that was so normal to me that I never realized that that was my form of not approaching or recognizing my shadow.
Mm.
And then that just added more fuel to my shadow, which meant I was becoming more and more distant, more angered, more past the buck, as Alan Watts would say. No, it's your fault,
Mm-hmm.
not my fault.
Mm-hmm.
I crapped the bed. Well, if you wouldn't have made that food last night, I wouldn't have crapped the bed.
Right. Right.
It's silly, right? It's dumb. Um, Fast forward a little bit, I went through a almost full year journey after quarantine of recognizing something's not right here, and it all honestly all started with the George Floyd stuff.
Really?
And yep, because all the
How did that be?
rallies. So now I have 130 plus years of law enforcement in my family,
Okay.
and
Right.
I never ever ever saw the corrupt side of the law.
Right.
My dad was a police officer that would turn in bad cops. My grandpa, he was a chief of police at Indiana University, and he changed a lot of things with how they treated minorities and students.
Got you.
And then the coolest one is my uncle, my dad's brother. Like, he was a conscientious observer during the Black Expo in Indianapolis. So I think
Mm.
Indianapolis is the only city that still has the Black Expo. Like, he never carried a
Right.
weapon during that time. So like whenever people would call cops like racist and whatnot, like I took it personally, right?
Right. Right.
Without ever really recognizing, like, okay, there are obviously corrupt people in every line of work, even in our line of work. There are corrupt podcast people, Gene. Yeah, joke. Um, but when I started seeing people who are very much like Blue Lives Matter type of people, and this, that, and the other, say, "Hey, this cop was in the wrong. The government, law enforcement's in the wrong with these things, that things." I was like, okay, I need to reevaluate some things here, and that was the kickoff for reevaluating a lot of stuff. And I think that was when my metaphorical road began being paved to directly confront this shadow archetype that we've started with. I hated it. I hated everything about the person that I was growing up, the things that I had done and said to my wife, the things that I had thought, and the rage that I had towards people, and the bridges that I had burned with reference to like Blue Lives Matter type stuff, or Black Lives Matter type stuff or whatnot. And it damaged me so bad that I actually started developing dissociative identity disorder because I was having such an internal conflict. Like there were multiple homies up here in Dan's brain that were fucking with me so badly that it took my wife punching me in the face as I had a mouthful of pills to to stop and recognize that my shadow person is probably the best part about me. And that from that point on is why like I went down this journey of like I'm gonna figure this shit out. I'm gonna preach to people, hey, it's okay to not like or to be afraid of a portion of you, but it's more important to talk to that portion of you and be comfortable and grow with it.
How much of that was like, you know, also you've experienced things a certain way for a long time, and now you're having these thoughts that are counter to your experience and what you've seen in your family, and you kind of don't know where to put those things.
Yeah,
you know,
that was tough. That's tough because we're born and then we're born and framed by those closest to us, our family, our parents, our grandparents. Like, we're gonna have the picture of the world with how we are raised to see it. And and this is not throwing my parents under the bus or whatever. I'm just speaking objectively. Most kids, especially those raised by like the boomer generation, a lot of them as kids were closed off to a degree and not necessarily able to see the world for what it was. And that's not blaming the boomers at all. You know, there was a strong degree of protection that the boomer generation placed on my generation, the millennial generation. Yeah. And we are very thankful for that. Now, we may have screwed some things up here and there, like social media and this, that, and the other. But hey, who's the coolest part about that is the boomer generation has actually set up a remarkable opportunity for the millennial generation, and that's to really understand and adhere the development and grasp of a growth mindset.
Yeah.
I mean, psychedelics haven't been legal since the 50s, 60s. Right. And because like during that time, just like we said, there was the fear of its impact on really the like economy and or money grubbers at the government level. The boomer generation has produced people who have pushed really hard for really good stuff to come out to help people with mental disorders, specifically anxiety and depression. Now, I won't say I'll include. I shouldn't just say millennials. Truth be told, I forget what the generation is before. I think that's your generation. What is that before millennials?
Gen X, I think is what you're thinking about.
Okay, because like a lot of the research involved with
there's
this
Gen
type of
Y,
beneficial
Gen
stuff.
Z, millennials. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't remember all of that. So the one before me. My parents are boomers. I'm a millennial. The one in between there, I think you're right. It's Gen X.
I think you're thinking Gen X, yeah.
Your generation has played a remarkable role in helping people understand and develop a good state upstairs, psychologically. And I give the boomers props in that sense because my parents, even though I'm a cop's son, grandson, great-grandson, nephew. My wife was in the Army. My sister's a doctor. I'm preaching a currently illicit form of, like, I won't say Eastern health, but because it mostly started, I believe the literature is started in Mexico or South America. I think Mexico, and again in Europe with the Swedish philosopher. But all that stuff now, because of the protection we put under, has allowed us to tap into Jung's work and specifically hone in on the shadow archetype. But there's one gentleman that sticks out a lot, and I believe he is part of the boomer generation, Phil Stutz. That is Jonah Hill's psychiatrist.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about that.
Okay, good. I'm glad we did. Everybody, I strongly encourage to go watch that because that's more of a
the Netflix documentary that Jonah Hill paid for about his therapist Phil Stutz. Yeah.
Yeah.
I watched it twice now.
dude, it's so good.
It's good.
And
Yeah.
his book, The Tools. Now he talks about in depth in the book, The Tools, about the tools he talks about in the documentary, the docuseries, or documentary. Yeah. Phil Stutz, I think, is an outlier in that regard because like he kind of modernized the archetypes we're talking about.
Yeah.
But he keeps one, and it's the shadow, and he talks about how important that is to approach it. He's like, growing with our shadow is imperative because a yin cannot be good without the yang.
Right. Right.
Or if that makes sense.
No,
I
it
may be
does.
trying to.
Well, the first place I ever heard of, I didn't hear the term shadow archetype until we talked on our last show. I'd heard it described as the shadow self.
That's fair.
And that's from one of my coaches, and I've talked about him a lot on my show. I'm such a fanboy. I respect him, Mark Devine, developer of Seal Fit, Unbeatable Mind. I've done both programs.
Hell yeah.
And he was talking about he's always talked about the shadow self, and he referenced Carl Jung, but I was like, whatever, I got the guy right here. I don't need to.
That's awesome.
But he believes that by embracing that yang, like whatever side, yin, yang, whichever side you want to put the shadow self on. Usually it's the yang side, it's the bottom side. By embracing that and learning what those things are, you can use that as a sense of a source of strength and mental toughness.
Yeah. Can you hear that plane?
Nope.
Okay, good. Sorry. Continue.
It's all good. Particularly when you're, a Navy or a person trying to make it through, buds. I have very strong sense of mental toughness. And also, I know you've done some very tough physical workouts. You've done competitions. You were a collegiate swimmer. I mean, you've been in the shit, where you're doing something physical and you feel like you're gonna die, but you can't let people down. Like, you face some demons, man. You face those demons that are like, why are you here?
Yeah.
Like I did it. We did I pulled on this the other day. We did I don't know if you're paying attention. Rogue they have a challenge every month, and one of the challenges was like 50 calories as fast as possible on the assault bike, or on their Rogue Echo bike. And
oh God.
Right? I swear to God, man, 2 minutes in, I quit. The first time I did it, I literally quit. I quit.
It's hard. It hurts.
Everyone in the gym was around. Like there were my students, and there were like other members of the gym, and I was like, you can't fucking quit in front of these people. I was like, they're gonna watch you quit. You're the don't quit guy. Like, you can't fucking quit. But I quit, and I was like, and I had to get back on it. But that was like confronting that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really hard to do when you're in the shit. To have enough and wherewithal to push through that.
The story is not as much about me as it is like, he teaches, look within, work with the shadow self. Don't just repress it. Don't just be like, yeah, there's a part of you that wants to be a quitter, but like, don't just be like, don't be a bitch and keep going. I mean, you need to find out like, what is that? What is that thing? What is that that makes you afraid of that pain? Like, and what are those tools that allow you to confront those things and keep going? For me, I like to shift gears. I like to think like, instead of thinking like, why am I here? This is the worst thing ever. I like to start shifting into like, man, isn't it cool that you're able to go as fast as you can on this thing? Like,
I like that.
This is great. Like, you're able to do this. So show these people what it's like to go as hard as you can. Like whatever you have to shift it into. But I think that only comes from recognizing that, in Jung's case, the shadow, recognizing that opposite thing that you're working on.
So that was multi-layered, man. Honestly, no. That was honestly, no, not at all. It all hits under that same deal, because not only are you battling like, I'm gonna quit and give up. That voice in your mind is more like, okay, at one point in time in my life, I would give into that. However, I'm going to ask myself this question: how can I shift gears? And my
Yeah.
response is, it's great that I get to showcase a degree of grit, fight, pain,
Yeah.
that I have the opportunity. I would argue that that is your shadow teaming up with you, and not necessarily that, because like the shadow and the voice saying "I quit" is a little different. In this sense specifically, though, I would argue that at some point in time, one of your biggest battles with you and with yourself internally was that you did quit at something,
Oh
and
yeah.
it impacted not just you at all, and it impacted something around you, someone, some people, whatever,
Yeah.
to where now like you have had multiple years of opportunity to train that question: how can I shift gears?
Mm-hmm.
And your answer, if it's great that I have the opportunity to X, Y, and Z, A, B, and C, that right there, in my opinion, based off what I understand, is one of the best possible ways to approach a portion of you that you've hated in your
Mm.
past, and you've developed a skill set to combat it and work with it. I don't know if that makes so much sense. I'm just rambling, but that's how
No,
I interpret that.
it makes great sense, and I've never broken that down. I just did it because Coach Divine told me to do it. I mean, quite simply, I was like, I respect him and what he's done so much. He says do it, I go do it. Like that's about as far as I went with it. And over the years, I'm like, well, it works, so I tell everyone else to do it. But
That's
I never really
awesome.
broke it down into like, what is the actual tool set? Like, how do you actually employ that? How do you develop that?
Oh, that's an awesome question too. That how to develop the skill sets for something that's so perceptibly subjective is phenomenal, because you hear this stuff like mental toughness and grit and whatnot, and using that is, I've come to learn that that is one of the most misused, most misunderstood and inappropriate terms to say to
Yeah.
somebody, because mental toughness bell curve is not, or is what society deems it to be. Like, oh, you're not very mentally tough, you're just a bitch.
Yeah, it's
No,
not it.
that is the,
Right.
so that is the ego-filled definition of mental
Yeah.
toughness.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not, because you're going to have days. You can be the most mentally tough individual. You're going to tell me that Matt Frazier was always the society-based definition of mentally tough?
I know.
Absolutely
I
fucking not.
know. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
If
he
not, go
definitely
listen
had,
to his story. Go read his story. He has a
exactly.
book. Go read it.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
right. I forgot about that.
Dude was
I
addicted to
mean,
drugs. I mean, literally
that's
addicted to cocaine.
so. All right, Dee McGillivray, the woman who you met earlier on the grid team, she said this: we all have to go through a high degree of shit, of things
Mm-hmm.
that we hate, in order to subjectively succeed and achieve our direct definition of self.
100%.
Like, she said that this morning
Right.
out of breakfast, and like she had no idea that we were going to be talking about this stuff today. And I bring it up because a lot of the people who I've learned from the most in recent times, and I won't include you because I don't know your background on this, they've been like hard drug addicts. They've gone to prison. They've done things that have been remarkably negative to them or those around them.
Mm.
And there's one of them that spent time in jail, and now he's probably one of the best people I've ever worked for in my
Mm.
life.
Right.
I won't say who it
Right.
was, so he would not be happy with me about it. But
Well,
those who also have the ability, I've come to find, anecdotally speaking, those who have the ability to preach how to objectively improve oneself
yeah.
has been through some of the highest degrees of trauma, but not necessarily like battle trauma or like
Right.
war
Right.
or whatnot, like Uncle Frank War type stuff as
Well,
well
yeah. I
as a
mean,
kid.
that's the thing. There's so many people on like Instagram and YouTube that are like retired Navy SEAL, like 47-year FBI agent or whatever. Like trauma doesn't have to be like I killed 47 people in the line of duty. Like it could be like, hey, I was picked on relentlessly when I was in 4th grade.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be something far less dangerous.
Oh yeah. I treated my wife like shit for 10 years. It could be something like that. So I'll tell you, I use that because, Gene, we've talked about it before, but that 10-year recognition that I have now, it damaged me so much that I felt as though I had been through hell.
Yeah.
I felt as though like I traumatized myself, and my response was to become very depressed and anxious, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
And no one else did it. I did, and that's also why I started to develop the dissociative identity disorder stuff.
Right.
Because that's for another talk if you ever want. I'll try to circle it back here. That development of a skill set to grow with the shadow.
Yeah.
I would argue that a lot of it comes from your Navy SEAL buddy, home dog. What's his name again?
Mark Devine.
No, Mark Devine.
I mean, let's put it this way.
I was just kidding.
For 70% of the time, he didn't know I existed.
Well, so in that, so the people who impact us the most usually don't know who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And even when they do know us, they may not know who we are. Because we're going to not know who we are, because our version of self is going to be our ego, which is going to be what society says we are. Because that is our troubleshooter.
Right.
So here's the badass part about the shadow, Gene, is, and we'll circle it to your assault bike example of what happened recently. Your ego was, okay, people are going to be expecting me to do this, so I have to do this.
Yeah.
Well, you have the skill set to block that out completely. So if you picture us as this big ass boat, and the ego is our tugboat, and it's pulling us to whatever tugboat's do, we are never going to hitch off of that tugboat until we are able to confront the shadow. In this sense, with you, your ego may have been in the past like, I can't quit. I'm going to stress out because people don't expect me to quit. I'm afraid, but I have to do this because of they say that I am a certain way.
Yeah.
Well, now, Gene, the reality of you is like, okay, I'm going to cut that cord, and my ego can drift off. Myself is going to do that because I value number one, myself, and number two, these people. I value these people because that is what my meaning in life is. My meaningful life state, is myself, my family, and these people. And that's why you're running the gym as well as you are now. You have this podcast going, and you're doing a badass job. So something has happened in your life to where your shadow didn't get its ass kicked. You took your shadow on a date. You guys had a nice conversation. You talked about some things that, just like whenever we have a good conversation with people we have the biggest debates with, you had a nice dinner, good conversation, and now you can meet in the middle. You're helping your shadow's helping you. Now I'm speaking of this as two different people. The reality is it's one.
Yeah.
But by omitting the shadow, you cannot be one. It's impossible because you're constantly going this direction while it's going this direction, and it's trying to grab you back and pull you back really hard. Now, I'll use a quick example, and I'll kind of circle it back to our psychedelic stuff from the past.
Yeah, we got to get back there. Yeah.
There's a session that I did a while ago that still sticks out to me. I was at a good state of mind. It was a good point. Things were going well, and then I did my session, and at the end of it, I was like, wait a minute, something's off. So picture a void. And in this void, there's a floating path of jagged rock. Like a flat on top, jagged rock on the bottom type. That's stereotypical in a void, walking on floating rocks or whatever. I viewed that as like my brain waves, or my brain matter, my brain communication, whatever, is being laid down. It's becoming foundational again. And then I looked off to my right and I noticed something. There was a piece floating out there. And on this little small piece of floating jagged rock, there was about 10 to 11-year-old starving kid sitting in the fetal position in a bird cage. And I've still yet to get to that kid. I've been building a bridge to get to that child, and I'm almost there. So that is another piece, in my opinion, of my shadow archetype trying to become a part of me again. Like there's something there because that little boy, like, I kind of recognize him. I think it's what I would look like if I were a starving child. I know that's hard to kind of. I got belly. That's hard to kind of see, but the
come on.
it's a remarkable degree of excitement. Like I'm sitting here slowly crossing this long ass bridge. It's taken about 4 or 5 months now, trying to get to this kid to help him.
Yeah.
And to see why he's there. Like, what's the purpose of this starving, abandoned child? So I'm developing theories like, am I suffering from abandonment issues somewhere, and it not be family related? You know, what's happening? And there's been a sequence of events that I'm not comfortable like sharing in a public forum. I can talk with you privately about sometime as to how I'm kind of laying down some of those planks. But that is I don't know if it's well pictured, but a potential picture that could be seen is how we can get back to our shadow and why it may be important to include what we hate about ourselves in our life. I mean, like we said before, the perception or the reality is, failing breeds success. In some degree, how you define it is subjective. And success can breed success, but failure breeds the highest degree of success. And I don't mean like monetary success, whatever. So, Gene, there's a portion to where, we said today that we wanted to talk about how can we actually achieve confronting our shadow archetype with a remarkable degree of comfort, and then come away from confronting our shadow with positivity. And what I'll start off now, are we cool to shift into that?
Absolutely.
So what I'll start off with is like in the video last time we spoke, the presenter talked about the trip itself when taking psilocybin, or any other like psychedelic that actually helps in a sense. The trip is our dive into our subconscious and bringing about what's problematic. And psilocybin being the most impactful and important one. Ketamine was close. There's still a lot of research being done with that, but this psilocybin we don't take to party. Psilocybin we take to develop a high degree of introspect. Now, people are afraid to be introspective. Do you know that?
Yeah.
So when we introduce the psychedelic to someone who is damaged, and we'll just stick with the example that I spoke of with that metaphorical child. It's terrifying to think that there may be some little kid out there in Dan's metaphorical brain that needs some type of help. Like it's kind of set up like a horror movie. Do I want to go over there? Is this going to do something to me? Now I'd say like right now it's like fuck yeah, like I'm gonna figure this out right away. But that's because I've already gone through the hellstorm that is that identifying self, and the assistance that we can get from the use of psilocybin specifically. I mean, acid's not as impactful, but it does work well. But psilocybin allows that shit to all come forward. That brings forward the biggest, scariest demons that has happened in your life, that and allows us to talk to them. I mean, quietly, or maybe loudly. In some cases, very loudly, but it all comes away as positive. Like, Gene, if we say a bad trip, people often describe that as what? I had a bad trip.
Oh, right. They took drugs and they got very sick.
Yeah.
Yeah. They had physical, like something bad happened physically and they had to get help, or they felt like crap, like they had the flu or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, your body will always feel a degree of poison.
Yeah.
When you introduce a substance to it that's not quote unquote natural, if you will. However, people who often achieve a quote unquote bad trip based off of what society deems as a bad trip, well, the stuff you consumed is laced. It's not. It's not actually what
Mm.
it is.
Mm.
Number two, mindset. Mindset's the biggest part. Mindset,
That makes
environment are the biggest
sense.
part.
Yeah.
If you don't go in knowing that I'm doing this to try to grow, I need to recognize that I need to grow in some form. I need to
Yeah.
recognize that my shadow is my homie, not my enemy. You're going to have a good trip. However, you can have a bad trip. And the bad trip in this sense being, I don't like what I have seen because of how fucked up it was in the past,
Hmm.
how fucked up I was in the past. But the trip in itself, the entire session will still be a good trip, even
Gotcha.
though it's a quote unquote bad trip.
Right.
Um, so now, Gene, the question is, why would anyone want to do that?
Why would they?
I was posed a question during a session one time from someone. Why would anybody want to take this psychedelic to expect a good time? Because this is awful. And what they were stating specifically was, I'm seeing everything that messed me up over the years.
Right. And
I'm recalling it all.
but I've spent all this time repressing it.
Right. So it's a terrifying thing.
Yeah. Right.
For a lot of people, I've come to find out through reading some literature, talking with others, when they dive into that subconscious realm after during the trip, the fear, the amount of fear that they experience
Hmm.
throughout, uh, uh, is just due to all the problems already suffering with it. Those who have significant
Mm.
depression have so much repressed that when it comes to the surface, it's debilitating.
Yeah.
Um, or they start convulsing, crying uncontrollably, screaming at themselves, screaming out loud. But then the coolest thing happens, Gene. At the very end, and this has been consistent. At the
Hmm.
very end, there's been a remarkable sequence of colors. So, are you familiar with when people say, "I can feel colors"?
Well, no, not really. I mean, I've heard it like as a joke, like,
So
here
th-
colors.
that's a real thing.
Okay.
Um, when so I'll take a risk here. When I did mine psilocybin therapy session, um,
Yeah, I
at the
think they know
very
that.
huh
I think our listeners know you've experimented.
okay, fair. Um, but at the very end of mine, I saw a bright green neon screen,
Hmm.
like when you see a bright blue screen and your computer dies or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mine was bright green neon, and it was euphoric. It
Huh.
was so strange. It was euphoric.
Yeah.
Um, but apparently that's like towards the end when things are almost over, because there were little blips of red coming out of my right side, like just kind of bink, 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 bink. And it was because my dog was walking in the hallway,
Oh
and it
wow.
was making me angry because I could hear
Huh.
him, because I was in such a good state of mind. I was like, this fucking dog, like he's bringing me out of it.
Yeah.
So I was literally feeling the color
Huh.
red.
Wow.
Green is good. Green is
Right. Red
content.
generally.
Exactly. Now another person, when they were coming towards the end of theirs, they were having black vertical bars, like prison bars,
Hmm.
at the front of their eyes. And behind that was a rainbow of sequences, a rainbow sequence of colors that was kind of
Hmm.
rolling, just like a ball, rolling through and
Yeah,
rolling
yeah.
and rolling and rolling, which I've yet to confirm this, but I think that's kind of a state of like bipolar disorder in a sense, but I could be wrong.
Interesting.
Um, that very, very end of the trip, in a sense, with the colors, literally feeling the colors, is, I believe, the closing circle to the journey of the subconscious that everyone just went through. And that
Hmm.
journey of the subconscious that you're going through is the journey of your shadow.
Hmm.
And there's a reason why I think I strongly believe that that's the reason why people are afraid and the scare tactics are there, other than the government related portion.
Right.
Like, man, I just went through this swirly method of Rick and Morty
Yeah.
that scared the hell out of me. I don't want to do that again.
Yeah.
But I actually feel a lot better because this color scheme popped up, and I can feel it. And there's been a unique degree of confirmation from some people, subjectively speaking, that I've helped through and whatnot during their sessions, unofficially. I have to say unofficially, so I'm not licensed. They've all kind of said the same thing about the color stuff. But what are your thoughts on that? Like, what do you think? Like, am I droning on a little much?
What now?
Am I droning on a little much?
No. I think the color thing is interesting. It's probably something that you have to experience in order to really understand.
Oh, I thought you were locking me out.
Yes, I agree fully, because like it sounds stupid and silly, bro. You felt colors? Come on, that is as the kids say, that is a cap, bro. You are capping.
I don't know about how cap it is. I just know that that definitely seems like something you need to experience, because I don't have a reference for that. I can imagine colors in like temperature, like hot, cold, or whatever. Like I can kind of go there, but outside of that, it's kind of alien. But I get it. It's interesting that that's part of the process.
It's unique. It's really unique, and I think that's why a lot of painters, after they've dabbled in stuff, become a lot better.
Why
and they have the
yeah, maybe, but why do you think that it's the assisted trip, with the psychedelics or whatever? Why do you think that is what draws this out of people? Why can't they, or why can't you, or whatever? Why can't you do it without it? Like, what do you need? What is it giving you?
So it's, from a molecular standpoint, it's giving you things that can bind appropriately to your brain, to keep it simple, quote unquote. The psilocin molecule, that's psilocybin, is broken down to the psilocin. As we talked as we saw in the video, the psilocin molecule will actually bind to the receptors in the brain and act and mirror, in a sense, like a serotonin, dopamine type stuff.
Yeah.
Which is there's interesting research in regards to like the serotonin and dopamine connection to depression, like showcasing that it's actually not fully connected to it. But we'll talk about that another time. But the psilocin molecule can aid in fixing what is missed. Now, how we can go about, or what we would need to avoid, I guess, using, quote unquote, or not needing any degree of like external assistance. My answer to that is I don't know. I don't have enough knowledge or wherewithal there to really grasp that entire concept. All I am aware of is like there's solid research with food and nutrition. Mushrooms, like not the magic ones, just like generic mushrooms. Consuming them is very important for just holistic health, especially the mind and clarity. Mushrooms play a remarkably important role in getting rid of bad shit in our soil, specifically glyphosate.
Sure, yeah.
And I'll have to send you a video on the glyphosate and whatnot. That's the active ingredient in Roundup. That basically, why is chemotherapy in the ground is the question that we have to ask when we see glyphosate in shit. But the mushrooms help combat a lot of the negative effects of that stuff. Anyway, but mushrooms, dark leafy green vegetables, and input other healthy food here. But those are the two biggest ones that have been showing promise in a sense. Now,
filtering.
Yeah, really. Yeah. Now, I mean, I'm not going to preach food in this sense, because everybody's different, number one, and number two, not a nutritionist.
Right.
But science is what it is, chemistry is what it is, and you go from there in a sense.
Yeah.
If the readings say that these molecules work in some fashion, these minerals work in some fashion to help
maintain,
it's
literally proven you are what you eat.
Yeah, that,
I mean,
that is.
molecularly, you become what you eat. So, I mean,
Yeah.
if you're putting these things in your body that have, these healing minerals or they're filtery or whatever, I mean, it's gonna have an impact.
And it's really cool because it's, we say that it's going to have an impact in topical. It's viewed as like, or understood as like, okay, an impact on just like I feel a little better, my body feels better. But what is not recognized is the 10 to 20-year impact
Right.
of eating like that. And it's,
100%.
you know, cellular aging is real, and it
Hmm.
doesn't just mean, oh, I look old now. No, no, no. We're including like your neurons. Like
Yeah.
neuronal death is real, and that's
Mm.
what causes Alzheimer's and dementia quite a
Right.
bit. And then also like things like Parkinson's as well. Like there was a massive uptick in the mid '90s ish, 30 years after like Roundup was introduced. So there were Parkinson's in men,
Mm.
Alzheimer's and dementia in women skyrocketed, and autism as well
Right.
in this day and age. So, excuse me. Um, that was a long-winded way, in a sense, to answer the question of like, what do we need? I don't know, but food is a good starting point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I encourage subjective meditative practices, like finding what works. Like for me, what I found that worked for me, Gene, was I had to take my shadow in hand and walk, and I had to let it lead me first until I could catch up.
Yeah.
Like, think of the shadow as like your all right. Think of the shadow archetype as Jon Snow. It just wants to be recognized.
Yeah.
It wants to be included. It's part of you.
And you can't kill it. See what I
No,
did there? See what I did there?
you're exactly right. You took the words out of my mouth.
I watched the show.
That's exactly right. Like, it can't be killed. The only thing that can be killed is the mythical ego.
Yeah.
And that's another thing I like to preach to, not preach. That was bad. That's another thing that I like to spark conversation with is if I say, this question, do you know that the ego is actually myth? It's not real.
Hmm.
People don't like that, and that's fine. They don't have to believe it. I don't have any substantial evidence showcasing it, but I
Huh.
have fun conversation that can eliminate it.
Yeah.
And that's why I used the metaphor I did earlier, Gene, with your tugboat.
Yeah.
And you cut the tugboat away when you're on the assault bike, and you let your ego flow away.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm boring the listeners now.
So no, I'm thinking you so that's what so my coach Divine, he's always talking about meditation practices, journaling, mindfulness approach to how you train, how you prepare yourself and stuff like that. And it took me a while to understand that those are just tools to slow you down long enough to sort of try to notice patterns and behaviors and things like that.
Ooh, I like that.
And I think I mentioned that, because I think a lot of people struggle with the tool set. They struggle with the tools, they struggle with, well, how many people have you ever said you should probably try journaling, and they journal for a little bit and they're like, yeah, I quit because what the hell am I doing?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you have to, they're tool sets for you to notice, things, simply journaling one of the things that was most effective for me was just journaling my emotions,
That's good.
it was just frustration, I realized one of my I'm not an angry person. I've never really been an angry, like you hear a lot of people say like I struggled with anger when I was growing up, and that is fine. Some people do. I realized mine was more frustration. I get frustrated with things, and then I would react in a certain way. And the way I reacted was I would just cut you the hell out of my life, just like boom, like done. I'm not talking to you anymore.
Nah.
Like I'm not even gonna respond to you. Bye. And you wind up not having many friends that way. You know what I mean? Because everyone
That's
is going to
true.
frustrate you. Even your wife, the person you married, is going to frustrate you. You can't just.
Oh yeah.
I suppose a lot of people do, but you can't just cut that out off of like one time that they make you upset. But it was more like just journaling, like, hey, I'm feeling frustrated, and then why? Like, what's the state? Like, what am I dealing with? And you start looking
Dude,
at
I love
patterns.
that.
Sometimes it is a person. Sometimes you're like,
Yeah.
wow, it's Brian, like, or it's Dave. Man, screw Dave. We got to get him out of my life. But sometimes it's just like, it's me.
Dude,
like, oh,
whoops.
shit.
Dude, all right. So I'm so happy you said that. You don't even know wow. I hope everybody who makes it to this point in this podcast heard what Gene just said. I'm just frustrated with me.
Yeah.
How that is so loaded and so hard to say.
Right.
And then once you establish that, the next step is why? Well, how the fuck do I answer that?
Yeah. And we talked about that a little bit last time.
Yeah.
In one of my notes is discuss examples of shadow self in sports, such as athletes who struggle with anger or competitiveness. Like that, like we talked about it, like an athlete they're going to be frustrated with themselves because they can't, they're shooting for a 500 deadlift and they only got 490. And, so now they're upset for the rest of the day, it's like, okay, dude, but you can try again tomorw. I mean, like, you know what I mean?
So how do we get it to turn?
How do you deal with that athlete? You have to teach them how to deal with it themselves. That's how you deal with it.
So I've come to find with that specifically, ask them questions.
Yeah, and I like that. I'd never thought about that until we talked about it last time, where you were just like, dig through it, just ask them why. Why do you feel that way? Why are you doing that? Well, why does that matter?
And they will get frustrated with us.
Yeah, they'll get
all the
frustrated
time until they begin to, once they enter I call it the 1% calm down state.
Ooh.
Once they enter that, which usually is like 2 to 3 minutes after the fact, a lot of times, they become vulnerable. And that's when it's kind of like, one of the most important times to eat after workout is within, they call it the anabolic window, right? I think that's still a thing.
Yeah.
That is, as a coach, our anabolic window for the people we are coaching. All right. They're in this state of mind. Now we jump.
Yep.
Hey, man. What's up? How you feeling right now? Oh, I'm down. Oh, what's making you feel down? I wish I would have just hit that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's walk through it.
Yeah.
Let's walk through the day. Let's walk through your game day mindset. Let's walk through.
Right.
Is it the end of the world? Now I don't term it like that.
Yeah.
Because you got to speak their language.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I mean, if you're telling an athlete because they just didn't hit one of their things they were trying to do, it's not the end of the world. They're gonna be like, yeah, fuck you.
Exactly. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you can't.
Diminish their effort.
No, not at all. It's like, negative.
Has anyone in the history of ever calmed down because you said, "Hey, calm down"?
Yes, everyone.
I doubt it. Probably just piss them off more. Yeah, you're right. You have to be subtle. Man, coaching is it's intense, man. There's a lot of different approaches.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking about that too. Like, I don't know how appropriate this is, but there's like that athlete, right? That's like upset because they didn't hit their goal. And then there's the other one that's upset because they didn't get their whole goal, but they don't really care. They're just upset because they think they should be upset.
Yeah.
Like,
and that
you're like, ooh, you're one of those people. Like, how do I deal with you?
So that's another thing as well. So I'll tell you what, I can give you direct information on that one because there's been a lot of those people that I've had to work with in my life.
Okay.
Those are the people you target as a coach, because those are the people who are the most afraid to approach what they don't like about themselves.
Yeah.
They just feel like they need to mirror behaviors because they're distancing themselves from themselves so fucking much.
Right.
Now, how can we get that to turn around? The important part is it's a long process, but the important part is to understand I'm going to enhance communication first. I'm going to develop the highest degree of trust and comfort with this person and then I'm going to showcase example. I'm going to showcase lead by example. And hey, there are times that I've just absolutely hated myself. And then I question, who is myself? Johnny, Billie Jean, Bob, who are you? And then that is when the new road gets paved,
right,
and turns back to themselves. Because I mean, honestly, Gene, like it's kind of interesting to loop it together, but it can all circle back to being afraid to grow with who
Mm.
your holistic being is. And so that is the specific method I use with them. I develop the trust, open the communication, develop the trust, show that I'm there for you. Now let's question who we are, and not like, hey, who are you? Look, motherfucker,
Yeah,
who are you? No, tell me who you are. It's like, hey, have you ever thought about like
yeah,
who I am
yeah.
or who you are? Who are you? What is I?
Why do you come here 5 days a week? You know?
Right. Did you know that? Did you know that every time you say my brain, you're also saying I, because the brain
Yeah.
is the only organ to name itself.
Yep.
You lead with that, and it makes them think.
Yeah.
And it's
I like
really,
that.
it's wild.
Yeah.
Gainesville wild.
Hey. That
That
was a
logo's gonna
long
look good.
advertisement. Long. You have to wait for an hour for the ad.
That's right. That's right. That logo's gonna look good on the Coors jersey.
Well, man, I've spent 3 hours with you in April talking about this stuff, and I don't want to quit. So we're going to continue our discussions as long as you'll keep coming back.
Absolutely, this is a lot of fun. I have a lot of people who are interested in talking with you, not about this, but like
Cool.
pretty much anything athletically related, mindset related, especially former fighters, current fighters.
That's cool.
I have a very impressive cerebral palsy high school kid that everyone would benefit listening to.
I would love
I
to
think
talk
you would
to
love
him.
him.
Let's set it up.
Sweet.
Yeah, man. Well, thanks for spending time with me again. I appreciate it, man.
No problem. I'll send some links for everyone to kind of see and follow. I encourage Gene placing those YouTube links that I sent you with the Jungian principles, especially the archetype ones,
Yeah, we'll get those in there.
the good and evil.
Hell yeah. All right, man. All right, everybody. Until next time, take care of yourselves.
Peace.